The galaxy's deadliest species. The galaxy was vast, stretching across the stars in all directions, filled with countless worlds and strange creatures. Some of these creatures were peaceful, others were fierce and aggressive. But among them, there were those who were known as the Deathworlders. These beings were the apex predators, feared by all who encountered them. Their home planets were harsh and unforgiving, places where only the strongest could survive. The Deathworlders had evolved to become the deadliest species in the galaxy, and they ruled over their worlds with an iron fist. The Deathworlders were a group of different species, all sharing one thing in common. They were born from the most dangerous environments in the universe. Some of them came from planets where the atmosphere was poisonous, where the oceans were full of deadly creatures, and the land was a constant battlefield. Others came from worlds where the weather could kill you in an instant, where lightning storms raged, and the ground trembled with earthquakes. These conditions had shaped the Deathworlders into what they were: fierce, unrelenting, and nearly unstoppable. For generations, they had conquered every species they encountered. Any who dared challenge them quickly learned that the Deathworlders were not to be trifled with. They had technology that allowed them to travel across the stars, but it wasn't just their advanced technology that made them so fearsome. It was their strength, their skill in combat, and their brutal tactics. They never took prisoners, and they never showed mercy. As the Deathworlders expanded their empire across the galaxy, they encountered many other species. Some of these species tried to resist, but they were always crushed. The Deathworlders' reputation spread far and wide. They were known as the galaxy's deadliest species, and no one dared to stand in their way. When a Deathworlder ship appeared in the sky, entire planets trembled in fear. But despite their power, the Deathworlders were also arrogant. They had never encountered a species that could stand up to them. They thought themselves the rulers of the universe, the strongest beings to ever exist. No one could challenge them, or so they believed. The galaxy was filled with species that feared the Deathworlders. Some species had even made peace with them, hoping to avoid conflict and survive in the vast, dangerous universe. Others lived in constant fear, knowing that at any moment, the Deathworlders might come to claim their world. The Deathworlders' reputation was such that no one even considered challenging them. The very thought of it seemed impossible. Then, one day, something changed. It started with strange reports. Ships in deep space began picking up unusual signals that didn't match any known species or technology. These signals seemed to be coming from an area of space that the Deathworlders had long assumed was empty, uninhabited. At first, the reports were ignored. The Deathworlders didn't concern themselves with empty space. There were no threats out there, or so they thought. But then, the reports began to grow more frequent. More ships encountered the mysterious signals, and strange things began happening. The Deathworlders started to feel an unfamiliar unease. They, who had always been the ones to conquer and control, were now being challenged by an unknown force. There was something about this new presence that made them nervous. It was a feeling they had never experienced before. Fear. In the darkness of deep space, the Deathworlders began to realize that they might not be alone after all. Rumors began to spread through their ranks. Whispers of a new species, one that was unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever seen. This species was strong, resourceful, and cunning. They fought not only with weapons, but with intelligence and strategy. They had no fear, and they seemed to possess an uncanny ability to adapt to any situation. The Deathworlders, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. The Deathworlders thought they were the galaxy's deadliest species, but what if they were wrong? What if there was someone, out there who could challenge them? As the mysterious reports grew louder and the unease spread through the Deathworlders' ranks, one question loomed over everything. Who were these mysterious beings, and what did they want? Little did they know, the answer was about to change the galaxy forever. The unseen threat. The galaxy had long been a playground for the Deathworlders. For centuries, they had roamed the stars, conquering worlds, defeating anyone who dared stand in their way. It was not just their power that made them feared. It was the brutal efficiency with which they destroyed anything that threatened their dominance. Their technology, while not the most advanced, was more than enough to crush any opposition. Their armies were made of the strongest warriors, bred in the harshest conditions, and trained to fight with a ferocity that few could match. They had become arrogant, their confidence so absolute that they began to underestimate the universe around them. As the reports of strange signals continued to pour in, many of the Deathworlder commanders dismissed them as nothing more than a malfunction or an anomaly in their communication systems. They had seen similar disturbances before, spurious signals, random bursts of static. It was nothing to worry about. At least, that's what they thought. But then came the attack. It was swift, unexpected, and devastating. A small Deathworlder scouting fleet was the first to feel the sting of this new enemy. They had been sent to investigate one of the strange signals, assuming it would be a simple mission, a routine exploration. They had no idea that they were about to be thrust into the most perilous situation of their lives. The fleet entered the area of space where the signals had been traced, expecting nothing more than empty void. But what they found instead was something that made even the hardened warriors aboard the ships feel a chill of fear. There, in the silence of space, they found a fleet of unknown ships, sleek, silent, and deadly. Their designs were unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever seen. The ships were not enormous like the Deathworlder warships, but they moved with a precision and grace that seemed almost unnatural. Before the fleet could react, the enemy struck. The first shot hit their lead ship before they even had a chance to respond. The energy beam tore through the hull like paper, splitting the ship in two. Within seconds, the Deathworlders' fleet was in chaos. Panic spread through the ships as the unknown enemy disabled their communications, making it impossible for them to coordinate any defense. The Deathworlders' elite soldiers, known for their fearsome combat skills, had never faced an enemy like this. The attackers didn't fight like the enemies they had crushed before. They didn't come in waves, relying on brute force. Instead, they fought with precision, using the environment of space to their advantage. The Deathworlders' weapons, powerful as they were, seemed almost ineffective against the speed and tactics of their assailants. The enemy ships, smaller but faster, darted around like shadows, striking with deadly accuracy. The Deathworlders' ships, heavily armored and built for straight-line combat, were caught off guard. They couldn't track their attackers, couldn't respond fast enough to the ever-shifting positions of the unknown ships. It was clear that the Deathworlders were outmatched. The battle raged on for what seemed like hours, but the Deathworlders knew they were losing. Their fleet was being decimated, one ship at a time, and they had no idea who, or what, was doing it. No matter how hard they fought back, they couldn't land a blow on their attackers. The mysterious enemy knew exactly how to counter every move the Deathworlders made. Finally, with their fleet reduced to nothing more than floating debris, the remaining survivors fled. They had been forced to retreat, something the Deathworlders had never done before. They were defeated, humiliated, by an enemy they couldn't even understand. Their pride, their sense of invincibility, shattered in an instant. Back on their homeworlds, the Deathworlders were in turmoil. News of the defeat spread quickly, and the once mighty empire now faced a crisis. For the first time in their history, the Deathworlders had been beaten. The warriors who had never known fear now faced an enemy that had made them run. But who were these attackers? Where had they come from? And how had they managed to wipe out an entire Deathworlder fleet with such ease? Rumors began to circulate among the Deathworlders' ranks. Some said it was a new species, a race even more dangerous than the Deathworlders themselves. Others believed it was an ancient, forgotten power that had been lying dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to strike. But no one knew for sure. All they knew was that these new enemies were unlike anything they had ever encountered. One thing was certain: the Deathworlders had underestimated their opponent. And now, they had to face the consequences. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Deathworlders, once the dominant force in the universe, were no longer at the top. They had been knocked down a peg, and they had no idea what was coming next. The unveiling of the unknown. The Deathworlders were not known for their capacity to retreat, but they had learned a hard lesson. This new enemy was not like any they had ever encountered before. The survivors of the disastrous fleet engagement returned to their homeworlds with a singular message. They had faced something beyond their understanding. The leadership of the Deathworlder Empire, once so confident in their superiority, now sat in crisis meetings. In their war rooms, commanders and tacticians debated, frantically analyzing the wreckage of the destroyed fleet. They had lost more than just ships. They had lost their sense of invincibility. The reputation of their elite warriors was in tatters, and the once proud Deathworlders knew they had to prepare for a new reality. But how could they fight an enemy they knew nothing about? For weeks, the Deathworlders' best minds scrambled for answers. Some suggested the attackers were an ancient species that had been hiding in the far reaches of the galaxy, biding their time. Others argued they were a new faction that had developed technology far beyond anything the Deathworlders had encountered. Whatever the case, the Deathworlders needed more information that would give them an edge. It was during these intense discussions that a single name began to surface: humanity. Rumors spread of a species from a distant, forgotten corner of the galaxy. They had once been written off as insignificant, primitive, even. But now, reports suggested that these humans had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, devastating the Deathworlder fleet in the blink of an eye. The name humanity was met with skepticism. The Deathworlders had known of humans before, mostly through ancient records, but they had never considered them to be a serious threat. Humans were, after all, just another species on a relatively unknown world. They were not technologically advanced by Deathworlder standards, and their small, mostly unarmed ships had seemed to pose no real threat to the galaxy's mightiest conquerors. But then came the shocking realization. The humans, despite their seemingly primitive appearance, were using tactics and technologies that were completely unfamiliar. The Deathworlders had seen battle before, but never anything like this. It wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their ships. It was their strategy. The humans were unpredictable. They fought with an almost savage ingenuity. They relied not just on firepower, but on psychological warfare, using fear and surprise to disorient their enemies. Their tactics were unlike anything the Deathworlders had seen before, and that made them terrifying. The next phase of the investigation began. A small group of Deathworlder spies was sent to gather intel on humanity. Their goal was to uncover how the humans could fight with such unexpected ferocity, and what weaknesses the Deathworlders could exploit. As the spies ventured deeper into the uncharted territory of humanity's home systems, they discovered more than they had anticipated. Humanity's rise to prominence in the galaxy had been swift, but it was not a simple story of technological advancement. It was a tale of survival. Unlike the Deathworlders, who had become complacent in their dominance, the humans had been forced to adapt or perish. They had endured wars, catastrophic events, and brutal environments that had shaped them into an incredibly resilient species. Their greatest strength was their ability to think on their feet, to fight with a resourcefulness that the Deathworlders, who relied heavily on their superior strength and technology, simply could not understand. The spies returned with a report that shook the Deathworlder leadership to its core. The humans were not just another species, they were an unpredictable force. They had the potential to rewrite the balance of power in the galaxy. The galaxy's greatest warriors now found themselves in a state of uncertainty. The galaxy was shifting, and the Deathworlders could no longer claim to be the ultimate power. They had made a critical mistake by underestimating humanity. But now that the truth had been revealed, the question remained: could the Deathworlders evolve to counter this new threat? The tension within the Deathworlder Empire was palpable. Some argued for immediate retaliation, believing that a swift strike would eliminate this newfound menace. Others urged caution, knowing that underestimating humanity again could be their undoing. The answer, however, was clear. A confrontation with humanity was inevitable. The Deathworlders' once unshakable confidence was gone, replaced with a mixture of fear and anger. They were no longer the apex predators in the galaxy, and it was this realization that set the stage for the most important battle in the galaxy's history. The First Strike. The Deathworlders' War Council had concluded that something needed to be done. They could not afford to let humanity continue to grow unchecked. Despite their surprise, the Deathworlders had regrouped and were now planning a counterattack. A strike meant to send a message not only to humanity but to the rest of the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Deathworlder fleet was preparing to face a challenge unlike anything they had encountered before. Their elite warriors had trained for years, sharpened in combat across the stars, but none of them had ever faced an enemy who thought like a human. The first strike was planned to be swift. The Deathworlders believed they could overwhelm humanity before it could truly organize its forces. A fleet of warships, armed to the teeth and bristling with advanced weaponry, was assembled. Their mission was simple: invade the human homeworld and crush any resistance before it had the chance to spread. Humanity, however, had been preparing for something like this. While the Deathworlders believed their superior numbers and firepower would win the day, they failed to recognize humanity's most dangerous trait: adaptability. Over the past few weeks, humanity had been quietly amassing its forces, fortifying key positions and perfecting strategies that would counter the Deathworlders' overwhelming power. Humanity had no intention of going down quietly. As the Deathworlder fleet entered human-controlled space, they expected to encounter scattered defenses, weak points that would easily be shattered by their superior firepower. However, they were in for a shock. At first, it was a subtle shift. The Deathworlder ships began to notice strange, untraceable signals emanating from the depths of space. It was as if something was watching them, waiting. But there was no time to investigate. The invasion was already underway. When the Deathworlder fleet arrived in orbit around Earth, they were met with a complete lack of resistance. No planetary shields, no active defenses, nothing. For a moment, the Deathworlders felt confident. This was exactly what they had expected: humans cowering in fear, unable to muster any defense. Then, without warning, the first wave of human ships emerged from seemingly nowhere. The human ambush was like nothing the Deathworlders had ever seen. Hundreds of small, unassuming ships, far fewer than the Deathworlder fleet, appeared out of stealth, using a network of old, discarded technologies and countermeasures. The Deathworlders had dismissed these ships as outdated junk, but the humans had turned them into deadly traps. The technology was old, yes, but that was precisely what made it effective. The Deathworlders' advanced targeting systems failed to lock onto the smaller human ships, whose erratic movements and unpredictable tactics threw the Deathworlders off balance. They had prepared for a well-organized battle, but the humans didn't play by the same rules. Instead of engaging in predictable dogfights, the humans used guerrilla tactics, striking the Deathworlder fleet with hit-and-run assaults, disabling weapon systems, and causing confusion. Human pilots showed remarkable skill, their actions instinctive and unpredictable. They used the environment to their advantage, zipping through asteroid fields, hiding in debris clouds, and using the planet's gravitational pull to mask their movements. The Deathworlders were completely caught off guard. Despite their technological superiority, the Deathworlders were forced to adapt, but it was clear that the humans were always one step ahead. The Deathworlders' sense of invulnerability was shattered as they realized that their enemy wasn't just technologically inferior. It was cunning, resourceful, and relentless. The battle waged on for hours, and though the Deathworlders had the upper hand in firepower, they were increasingly frustrated by the humans' tenacity. The humans, instead of retreating, seemed to grow bolder. They had baited the Deathworlders into this conflict, and now they were making every strike count. In the heat of the battle, a transmission was sent out from the lead Deathworlder ship to their home base. "We are facing something more than we expected. They are not like any species we have encountered before. This simple message echoed across the Deathworlder fleet, but it was too late. The humans were not just defending their home. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity had arrived, and it was here to stay. The turning point. As the battle raged on, the Deathworlder fleet found itself faltering. Their superior numbers and advanced technology were slowly being rendered useless by the relentless, unpredictable nature of humanity's tactics. Every move they made was countered by the humans in ways they hadn't anticipated. They had come to conquer, but now they were struggling to survive. On the ground, humans had prepared for an invasion like no other. They had studied their enemies' tactics and weaknesses, and they had learned to exploit them. They knew that Deathworlders relied heavily on their advanced weaponry and battle strategies, but the humans had one advantage they didn't: ingenuity. As the battle in space intensified, humanity's forces on the ground were equally engaged. They had secretly developed new forms of warfare, using old Earth technologies mixed with innovative adaptive modifications. The Deathworlders were overwhelmed, not just by superior tactics, but by the sheer creativity of humanity's weapons. They were used to facing enemies who relied on brute force. They were not ready for humans, who could turn anything into a weapon. In one of the key cities on Earth, a small resistance force found themselves locked in a standoff with Deathworlder ground forces. But instead of retreating, they used their environment to their advantage. They had rigged entire city blocks with traps, making use of old technologies like electromagnetic pulses, outdated explosives, and even primitive yet effective guerrilla tactics. The Deathworlders, who had fought countless battles across the galaxy, found themselves struggling against humans who didn't follow the rules. Back in space, the Deathworlder fleet had finally made its move, ready to unleash their final, devastating weapon. A massive ship, larger and more powerful than anything humanity had seen, emerged from the depths of space. It was their last hope, a weapon designed to wipe out everything in its path. But the humans were already one step ahead. In a move that stunned the Deathworlders, humanity activated a new weapon of their own. Using the ancient, discarded technology they had gathered and repurposed, they deployed a weapon of unimaginable power. This weapon, designed with the very limitations of the Deathworlders in mind, was humanity's secret weapon, one that exploited the vulnerabilities of even the strongest ships. As the Deathworlders watched in horror, the massive ship that had once seemed invincible now appeared helpless. The humans' weapon, a combination of unconventional tactics and devastating force, disabled the ship in seconds. The once feared Deathworlder fleet began to falter. At that moment, the Deathworlders realized the truth. They had underestimated humanity. They had believed they were facing a species that could be easily crushed. Just another primitive race to conquer. But they were wrong. Humanity was not just a species that fought to survive. It was a species that could adapt, innovate, and overcome even the most advanced threats. The turning point had come. The Deathworlders were no longer the predators in this galaxy. They were the hunted. The desperation of the invaders. As the battle stretched on, the Deathworlders' desperation grew. They had never encountered an adversary like humanity before. Their fleet, once formidable and intimidating, was now riddled with damage and disarray. The invaders had underestimated the resilience of the humans, and the shock of their own vulnerability began to set in. On the battlefield, the Deathworlders' confidence faltered. In their arrogance, they had believed that their superior technology and experience in intergalactic warfare would be more than enough to crush humanity. But instead, they were met with constant surprises. Every time they thought they had gained the upper hand, the humans adapted, outwitting them with unexpected tactics. Back on Earth, humanity's forces worked tirelessly to capitalize on every advantage. The global network of human resistance cells, which had been organizing and preparing in secret, now operated as a well-oiled machine. Every scrap of information about Deathworlder weaknesses was shared, and every human with an innovative idea was put to work. Humans had always been resilient, but now They were more than just survivors. They were a force of nature. The Deathworlder leadership, trapped within their own hierarchy of power and pride, struggled to respond. Their commanders, once full of certainty, now had doubts. Reports from their scouts spoke of unexpected ambushes, traps, and human ingenuity that kept them on the defensive. Their warriors, trained to fight with brutal efficiency, were beginning to panic in the face of enemies who refused to play by the rules. Meanwhile, on the front lines, a human strategist named Captain Leah Mitchell had devised a brilliant plan. She knew that the Deathworlders would rely on their overwhelming strength for one final, crushing blow. But what they didn't understand was that humanity was now fighting with the full might of its intellect. Captain Mitchell's plan would take the battle to their very core, directly at the Deathworlder command ship. With a small but highly skilled team, Mitchell led a covert operation to infiltrate the Deathworlder flagship, a massive vessel that had been the cornerstone of their forces. The plan was risky, but it was humanity's only chance to strike at the heart of the invaders. If they could disable the command ship, they could cripple the Deathworlder fleet and force them to retreat. On board the flagship, the Deathworlders were unprepared for the audacity of the human assault. As Mitchell and her team infiltrated the ship, they left a trail of chaos in their wake. Using their knowledge of Deathworlder technology, they bypassed security measures and planted explosive charges at key locations. The invaders, shocked by the audacity of this attack, could only scramble to defend themselves. In the final moments of the mission, as the charges were set to detonate, Captain Mitchell made a discovery. She stumbled upon a massive control room where the Deathworlder fleet's entire command structure was centralized. It was heavily guarded, but her instincts kicked in. With her team in tow, she rushed forward, a mixture of adrenaline and determination driving her every move. The final confrontation occurred in the heart of the Deathworlder flagship, where the true scale of the invaders' arrogance was revealed. They had thought themselves unbeatable. They had thought that no one, especially a species as young and seemingly primitive as humanity, could pose a threat. But as Mitchell and her team breached the core control center, the Deathworlders knew that their empire was on the brink of collapse. Captain Mitchell's eyes met the commander of the Deathworlder fleet, an alien who had once viewed humans as insignificant. But now, as he realized the extent of their resolve and ingenuity, there was only one thing left in his eyes: fear. Fear not just of defeat, but of the very species they had underestimated. As the timer ticked down, Captain Mitchell turned to her team, knowing the explosion was imminent. They had done what was once thought impossible. Humanity had struck at the heart of the invaders' power. The Deathworlders, whose strength had once made them conquerors of the galaxy, now faced a reckoning. Humanity had proven, in the most spectacular way possible, that it was not to be underestimated. The invaders had come to dominate, but now they were fighting for their very survival. The final stand. The explosion was deafening. The blast rippled through the Deathworlder flagship, shaking its very foundations. The ship, once a symbol of the invaders' unstoppable power, now cracked and burned from within. In an instant, all communication lines between the fleet's leaders went dark. Chaos ensued. Captain Leah Mitchell and her team had barely escaped the blast radius, making their way to a hidden chamber deep within the ship. The explosion had disabled the central command systems, throwing the Deathworlder fleet into a state of disarray. The invaders' once pristine fleet was now a chaotic mess of disjointed ships, vulnerable and unsure of their next move. With the destruction of their command ship, the Deathworlders' ability to coordinate their forces had been shattered. Their fleets were in complete turmoil, struggling to communicate and regroup. Some ships, without guidance, turned and fled, while others were left vulnerable to human strikes. The invaders' once unshakable unity had fractured in the wake of their greatest defeat. Back on Earth, humanity's forces rallied. The message was clear. Humanity had struck a decisive blow. The Deathworlders, unable to respond to the overwhelming surprise of human resolve and tactical brilliance, were beginning to lose their grip on the galaxy. Resistance movements across various planets became empowered, emboldened by humanity's success. They rallied together, now united under the banner of a common cause, to drive the invaders out and reclaim their freedom. However, the Deathworlders were not ones to accept defeat lightly. As their fleets scattered, their leaders issued a final order: retreat. They would regroup, but they would never forget the humiliation they had suffered at the hands of this young and underestimated species. They would not surrender, not yet, not without exacting vengeance. But humanity, on the other hand, was already looking ahead. The global leaders, now united more than ever, began preparing for the next phase of the war. They knew that the Deathworlders would return, but they were also aware that they had proven something fundamental to the galaxy, that humanity was not a species to be dismissed. As the dust settled, Captain Leah Mitchell stood among her team, overlooking the battlefield. She felt the weight of what they had accomplished. The war was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. The Deathworlders' arrogance had been shattered, and humanity had claimed its rightful place among the stars. The galaxy would no longer be the same. In the final moments of the battle, humanity proved what the Deathworlders had failed to understand. It was not just their weapons or technology that made them dangerous. It was their sheer will, their resourcefulness, and their relentless desire to survive. The invaders had been fooled into thinking that humanity was weak, but now they understood the terrifying truth. The Deathworlders had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and outclassed by the very species they had thought unworthy of their attention. It was not through overwhelming force that humanity had won, but through cunning and determination that defied all expectations. As the Deathworlder fleets limped away, humanity's victory was solidified, but the message was clear: this was only the beginning. And the galaxy would never forget the day when the Deathworlders learned that there was a reason why humanity was not to be underestimated. Because even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity was more than capable of rising to the challenge, and when they were pushed too far, they would stop pretending to be the civilized ones. They would become something far more terrifying.